welcome. I'm Patty Mercer, and this is Fort Mill Business Today. Our guest, Joe Cronin, the town planner for the town of Fort Mill, is going to be talking about the Unified Development Ordinance, which is a really big deal. Welcome to Fort Mill Business Today, Joe Cronin. How are you?
Thank you. Great to be here.
Wow. So when we talk about this UDO, tell us what it stands for and what it actually means.
Sure. A UDO is called a Unified Development Ordinance. And basically what a lot of cities and counties do is they take and they try to update and consolidate all of their, not only zoning, but also their land development, their subdivision, their environmental, their stormwater regulations, all into one unified ordinance, hence the term a Unified Development Ordinance.
It seems that this UDO would simplify the process, but tell me specifically, why is it good for Fort Mill?
Well, really the biggest thing that we were trying to accomplish is our current code, our current zoning ordinance, was actually adopted in 1969. So it's almost 50 years old. And in terms of, where we were in 1969, Fort Mill as a community is a heck of a lot different today than it was in 1969. And if you go through and you look at a lot of the language from our current ordinance that we're now in the process of replacing, you'll see examples of, where you can have a millinery store.
A millinery,
now, I actually had to look it up, but yes, it's a ladies' hat store. It talks about you can't have a chicken, but you can have a cow. Was one of my favorites. How loud you can play your phonograph, which I was born in 1981. I've never actually seen a phonograph outside of a museum before. So a lot of the language that was in our existing code was really just so outdated and really wasn't reflective of the type of development that we see today and the different diverse types of housing options that people are actually seeking out today as well. So we wanted to go through and really bring our code into the 21st century and to have something that was more reflective of the needs and the desires of the community, something that still allows people to develop property, develop commercial property, and is respectful of private property rights, but also places greater level of protections for existing property owners in terms of having things like buffers and tree preservation and environmental standards. So with this, like any other public policy, it's really a balancing act.
Sure.
Trying to preserve the private property rights, but also maintaining the aesthetic and the look and feel and the type of the development that we want to see as a community.
Which makes me wonder, how would you even begin to create a draft for public review to try and create solutions that are in the best interest of Fort Mill and taking into consideration those property owners and existing businesses?
Yeah, this is actually, we're talking now, we're towards the end of our process, but the Unified Development Ordinance, actually the process started back almost 2 years ago. It was December of 2014, and our town council had approved a contract with a third-party consultant out of Michigan, LSL Planning, and we brought them in to kind of give us an outside perspective as they assisted us with putting our ordinance together. But Council created a Unified Development Ordinance Advisory Committee, which was made up of the 7 members of our Planning Commission, as well as the chairman of our Board of Zoning Appeals and our Historic Review Board. And over a period of about 18 months, they held a number of committee meetings. They also brought in a variety of different stakeholder groups. We had people from a variety of different groups within the community. We had real estate developers, we had commercial property owners, we had environmental advocates, we had town staff, We had an economic development group, which the Fort Mill Economic Council was a part of. We were glad to have FMEC at the table for that. And then we also had public input opportunities throughout the process. And like I said, over a course of about 18 months, our advisory committee, working with town staff and the consultant, put this draft ordinance together. And ultimately, earlier this summer, presented the draft to town council. And council went and requested a couple modifications. So we've been working on those over the last couple months. And here we are now going into December. And that document is actually going to be moving forward. It's actually two items. It's the ordinance itself,
right,
as well as a zoning map, which will be a new rezoning for the entire, all of the parcels in the town limits. And that map will basically implement all of the changes from the new Unified Development Ordinance.
Now, change can be a word that's a little bit scary. I think as people, sometimes we are a little resistant to change, and especially as it relates to Fort Mill, because we've seen so much growth in such a short period of time. What questions are you being asked by property owners? Are they concerned that this might impact how they're able to market their own land and sell it accordingly?
Yeah, we hear from property owners all the time, both as part of this process and just, as part of our daily business. When you're the planning department, you deal with the public pretty much all day, every day. Really, the biggest change from this ordinance, and the one thing I hope your viewers would take from it, is really the lion's share of property owners won't see any real tangible impact to their property or their ability to sell or develop their property. There will be some parcels that'll be rezoned as we go through the rezoning process, but really the lion's share, the overwhelming majority, I think it was about 98% or so, really won't see any tangible impact from their property or property values. But yeah, we do get a lot of calls, not only just how will this impact me personally, but they may see an issue or have a concern, and they know we're going through this process, and they'll be calling and say, well, we really think that you should be doing more to manage traffic impact or to preserve trees and those kind of things. So that was one of the priorities that we looked at as we were going through the process, to make sure that we had a good document that really protected the quality of life in our community and really retained the things that make Fort Mill a very special place and one that continues to draw people every day.
Absolutely. Now, would you say that is definitely the goal? It's different than the comprehensive plan, which is kind of a 10-year working plan. The UDO, why had it not been updated in such a long time? Why now?
Yeah, well, one of the things, going back and actually looking at the original document, which we actually just stumbled upon a couple months ago here at Town Hall.
Which is amazing.
It was amazing, especially when you look at the old zoning map from 1969 and what we have today. And a lot of the changes that were done to our zoning ordinance in particular, they were done 1994. The state passed the Comprehensive Planning Enabling Act, and all of the cities and counties around the state were really trying to scurry to make their codes compliant with that statute that was passed by the state legislature. And a lot of the changes that were done in our ordinance, which really isn't all that uncommon, were really piecemeal, Band-Aid type approaches. And you can do that for a little while, but eventually you get to a point in time where the nature of the community changes, the vision of what it is and where you're trying to go as a community changes. Fort Mill in the 60s was a big mill community. Of course, the mills aren't here today. Right. So we really saw this as an opportunity to have a wholesale evaluation, sure, review, and to bring back a new code that really brings us into the 21st century and implements the vision that our council and the public have defined in our comprehensive plan.
So it's really a way to protect the branding of Fort Mill by preserving history and making sure that new development understands the specific guidelines and everybody's on the same page. Yeah, to ensure that vision.
Sure. One of the things that we heard was, we need to define what it is that we want to be and where we want to go. And, if you look at some of the things in our code, there's really a lot of, what exactly does this mean in our new code? And this was something that was important for council and important for our planning commission and the committee and town staff as well as we were putting our UDO together. We wanted something that focused on quality. We wanted to focus on consistency and predictability. Quality meaning we want to have the best high quality development that we can have, that people can still afford to do in our community. Consistency, we wanted to make sure that we were treating people the same, regardless of who it was coming in the door. The rules and regulations would apply the same to every property owner, whether it was a small mom and pop commercial development or a large multinational corporation. The rules were going to be the same and consistent across the board. And predictability is, a lot of times when somebody comes in and they don't really necessarily know, because it's not accurately defined in your ordinance, what it is you want to see. And if we can put that language in our code and we tell somebody, if you build this, your project will get approved, then that means it creates a greater level of predictability. It allows them to get their project moving faster, and they have a reasonable assurance that if they submit something that is consistent with our ordinance, that their project will ultimately get approved.
So Joe Cronin, thank you so very much. When we return, we're going to talk to the assistant planners in the town of Fort Mill to learn more about the planning and the zoning aspects of the UDO. And we'll be right back.
The past is definitely coming to life at the Fort Mill History Museum, and we invite you to become a part of it. Come and experience our many exhibits and beautiful works of art by talented local artists in the museum's education gallery. They give you a glimpse of what Fort Mill was like from the 1600s to today. And with Christmas just around the corner, visit the J.B. Mills gift shop and pick up exclusive ornaments depicting the people and places of Fort Mill's history. Take a trip back in time and experience the rich history of Fort Mill at the Fort Mill History Museum at 107 Claiborne Street. For more museum information, call 803-802-3646 or go online to info@fmhm.org.
We're back, and this is Fort Mill Business Today, continuing our conversation about the UDO with Assistant Town Planner Diane Dill. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Good. Now, before we were talking with Joe Cronin about what the Unified Development Ordinance is, and one thing is sure, you've got the two parts, zoning and the ordinance. So let's talk from your perspective about the planning.
Right. The comprehensive plan, as I think Joe mentioned it as well, it's our vision. It's where we see the town going in 20 years from now. It talks about goals and strategies actually to achieve our plan, our bigger vision for the actual town. It's not any kind of enforceable document. It doesn't have any kind of power. It's more about a big vision sort of document. Whereas the zoning ordinance, now that one talks more about regulations, rules. It gets more, you can actually enforce that one. It talks about setbacks, buffers, street widths, those sorts of how to actually develop land. So the two documents are related to each other, but they're different.
So yes, I was wondering what the relationship is. So one is the big picture,
Right.
and one is the enforceable, measurable aspects of zoning.
Exactly. Yeah, the two documents have a very strong relationship. It actually, you can implement your plan by having a very good, strong zoning ordinance. The two actually relate together. Now, when you don't have that, then you have things that are conflicts, and unfortunately that does happen. So for instance, one of your goals for the comprehensive plan is to have walkable mixed-use developments. And then to achieve that, if the zoning ordinance doesn't speak to any kind of pedestrian connections or being able to have mixture of uses, then you won't actually achieve your goals. And so your plan, it appears as though it's not actually happening.
So is that where you might have a pedestrian crosswalk and nothing more.
Exactly. Or you might have a development where you come into a development and you have no way to walk from one place to the other. It's all geared towards the car.
Diane, when you talk about this bigger picture, can you give us an example of, an area, place that we might understand what that looks like?
Sure. You would recognize probably Baxter Village as being more of a mixed-use kind of environment where you'd be able to walk from your home to a store. It has sidewalks. The pedestrian or other modes of transportation are taken into consideration. As opposed to a typical single-use development where you would get out of your car and have to walk through the parking lots to be able to actually get to a business.
So we're really talking about Fort Mill and the quality of life.
Exactly. So the plan here is to make sure that the ordinance is consistent with the actual plan, and that's the goal.
Do you think it's even more vital right now, especially as so much development is happening in York County, to be very careful in the development of the land that we have to work with within the city limits of town of Fort Mill?
Sure, absolutely. Our land is finite. We can only go so far.
You want to do it right the first time.
Absolutely. And we're having more folks moving into the town that have certain requirements. We want to make sure that we are keeping up with those goals of the newer people coming into the town.
Yes, absolutely. And businesses that may want to decide to build.
Sure, to relocate here as well.
Relocate here,
Absolutely.
and they'll be able to know right away if they qualify within that UDO or not.
Exactly.
Before too much time and money hasn't been invested in a vision that someone may have. Okay, so Diane, when we look at the future land use and the zoning map, they're not identical.
Exactly.
Why?
Well, the future land use map is how we want to see the town grow. So this is our vision for the town, and it has very broad distinctions about different areas, whereas the zoning map, it's how it is right now. So for instance, the zoning map, as you saw that map that we saw earlier today, it was established based upon probably what was going on at the time, the use, the development pattern, and so that zoning map has been consistent throughout time. Whereas the comprehensive plan, it changes. It's the bigger, broader vision. So the goal is to be able to have those two similar. And this UDO, doing the new UDO, will give us a chance to be able to make those two maps align even better.
Thank you so much, Diane Dill, for helping us understand the UDO from a planning perspective. Next up, we have Chris Pettit, Assistant Town Planner for the town of Fort Mill, talking about the zoning as it relates to the UDO when we come back.
Who else has been taking your prescriptions? Keep your medicine and your family safe and secure. Mind your meds. To learn how we can help, visit the Partnership for Drug-Free Kids at drugfree.org.
We're back, and this is Fort Mill Business Today. Next up, Chris Pettit from the town of Fort Mill, Assistant Planner. Welcome to Fort Mill Business Today.
Thank you for having me.
So as it relates to the UDO, the Unified Development Ordinance, of course we heard from Diane, the overview, the vision. The zoning is more specific, it's measurable. How will it relate in terms of what we're familiar with?
Sure.
Mixed property, residential, commercial, highway. What's going to happen?
Well, first I want to say that we've put together a transition plan that outlines really the framework for how we're moving from the old zoning ordinance to those new districts established in the UDO. And really what we're trying to do is to consolidate some of the similar districts that we had in the old district, eliminate some that aren't being used, really to make it simpler and easier to use for all those folks. For example, today we have 11 residential districts. We're reducing that number to 5. With that reduction, there's still going to be added flexibility, so there's no really concerns with that, but we are reducing those numbers to make it simpler for folks.
Well, let me just make sure that I understand. Really what you're doing, most of us won't even be aware of
Absolutely.
the fact that we went from X number of districts down to this number of districts. It will only come into play when there's a question about maybe you want to build a business in your backyard or add something that is outside of what was there when you bought the property, that's when you would come to the town of Fort Mill and look at this zoning map to see what your options might look like. Is that right?
Correct.
Safe?
I mean, unless you talk about zoning at the dinner table, which I highly doubt that most folks
No,
do.
I do actually.
Oh, okay. But
this is my French fry zone.
Sure,
This is-
absolutely. Absolutely. But yeah, for the most part, most people won't notice any difference. You know, the name of their zoning might change, but ultimately we've really tried to make sure that the permitted uses really aren't going to affect that many people throughout the town of Fort Mill.
And this is really a very beneficial thing because we've all visited places where you would have a residence and then a house, and it just seemed like a big, like no rhyme or reason or planning in place. This gives Fort Mill an opportunity to stay within the branding of what we are.
Absolutely, and as Diane spoke to, we have a vision for the town of Fort Mill, and really what the zoning does is it enables us to build towards that vision. So, you know, certainly we are changing the zoning districts. For instance, we're adding a commercial district, the downtown core district, and that district is really designed to create uses and promote uses that allow to create a vibrant downtown. So bring people to shop, play, eat, work, and really create a walkable, vibrant downtown. So that's a new district that we've added to really promote the comprehensive plan and to promote downtown Fort Mill.
And that's exciting too because Main Street is hopping
Absolutely.
in Fort Mill, and
Absolutely.
it's continuing to find its unique niche. I love it. And also from a tax perspective, having diversity in different
Certainly.
tax bases makes a big difference as well. What are the permitted uses and requirements of the districts?
So one of the biggest changes in permitted uses is not necessarily taking away uses that were allowed in the old code, but one of the things that we're doing is we are adding what is called conditional uses. So if you look at our new UDO use table, you'll look at a district and there'll be both permitted uses and conditional uses. And so, for example, in a downtown district, if you wanted to do a barber shop, you can absolutely do a barber shop. It's a permitted use. But if you wanted to do something different like a drive-through, there are some additional concerns, additional things that you may need to look at so that it fits into the area. You protect pedestrian safety, traffic circulation. You look at some additional conditions. So what we have done is added a lot more conditional uses, and these are things that we look at today anyways, but we have put them into the code, written them into the code to add really predictability for developers coming in so that they know these are the things I have to do to have an approved project.
I like that. So that's really from the commercial standpoint, making sure that if you have a vision to create a user walk-friendly area, that you don't have a lot of driveways and
Absolutely.
sharing of space between pedestrians and cars. What about residential developers? What changes can they expect to see with the UDO?
Some of the biggest things that we've done with residential developers is, for instance, we've added some open space and buffering requirements. In our old code, not every residential district had buffering and open space requirements. We have added those to the new UDO so that every district has to have a buffer around the perimeter edge, and that's really to protect existing property development.
Which is a very nice thing.
Absolutely.
And then from a resident's perspective, what changes might they see with the UDO?
Two big things that are talked about in the town of Fort Mill are traffic and landscaping and potential clear cutting of development. Those are things that people get upset to see. So in the new UDO, we've added a section on traffic management and really talks about traffic impact analyses and added more requirements on when those are required and what those really need to look like. Access management as far as driveways and how folks enter properties and exit properties from a safety perspective, that's important. So in the long run, from a traffic perspective, we're better able to manage how these new developments affect the traffic patterns in the town of Fort Mill. From a landscaping perspective, we certainly have enhanced the landscaping that's required for all projects to really promote the quality of life, to enhance the quality of development. But one of the main things that we have done in the tree preservation section is we have added some additional requirements to promote and incentivize those new developers to maybe think twice about clear cutting the property to protect some of this existing tree cover that everybody knows and loves today.
Absolutely, and we do so much with our green space. It really has become a signature part of the quality of life living in Fort Mill.
Absolutely.
Chris Pettit, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
When we return, more about the UDO. This is Fort Mill Business Today.
The past is definitely coming to life at the Fort Mill History Museum, and we invite you to become a part of it. Come and experience our many exhibits and beautiful works of art by talented local artists in the museum's education gallery. They give you a glimpse of what Fort Mill was like from the 1600s to today. And with Christmas just around the corner, visit the J.B. Mills gift shop and pick up exclusive ornaments depicting the people and places of Fort Mill's history. Take a trip back in time and experience the rich history of Fort Mill at the Fort Mill History Museum at 107 Claiborne Street. For more museum information, call 803-802-3646 or go online to info@fmhm.org.
We're back, and this is Fort Mill Business Today. We're continuing our conversation with Joe Cronin about the UDO. So Joe Cronin, thank you so much for coming back to the table. We want to wrap this up so that everybody understands what we're talking about as it relates to a UDO and a zoning map. So how would you recap what we've learned so far?
Yeah, just kind of going back to what we started with, how important the Unified Development Ordinance is to update, modernize, and to really bring our zoning and land development and subdivision standards into the 21st century. Again, we said before, the current ordinance was by and large written in 1969. It's almost 50 years old. So it was time to reflect the changes, the changing nature of the community, the types of housing options that people are looking for, and trying to address some of the community concerns that we've heard as we've gone throughout this process over the last 2 years. This ordinance is not going to be perfect. No ordinance will ever be perfect. But we think it's really bringing us a huge step forward into improving the quality, consistency, and predictability of new development in our community. You know, we said before that the ordinance itself, by and large, is really not going to impact our regular, typical property owner. The overwhelming number of property owners really won't see any change in terms of permitted uses and setbacks and things of that nature. I actually had a phone call today from a gentleman, and you know, he said he had been a resident of the town for 43 years, and he wanted to call. He saw our advertisement in the newspaper that we're getting ready to kick off this process, and he wanted to see, you know, am I going to be impacted?
Sure.
And I kind of put him at ease and said, you know, there aren't going to be any major impacts to your property. You'll be able to continue to stay there. It's staying residential. And he was very appreciative, and his response was, I've lived here for 43 years, my wife and I, and we just want to live in peace. And you know, we told him that this ordinance was going to protect people like him, make sure that he could continue to live and enjoy his property, as will most other property owners throughout the town. And then also, I think, you know, putting some provisions in place to streamline in terms of new economic development projects, having the tools in place, again, the predictability, the consistency, to know that if somebody submits an application or a project and it conforms with all of the new requirements in our ordinance, there's not going to be subjectivity or a question of is it going to get approved or not get approved. It's if you design to the standards, which will be enhanced standards compared to what they are today, they have a reasonable assurance that project will get approved and be able to move forward. So a lot of really good things. Again, it's something we've been working on for just about 2 years now, and as we move forward into the adoption process, of course, there's going to be a lot of different things going on.
Sure.
So we're very excited to be at this point, but of course, there's still work to complete going forward.
Now, the comprehensive plan plan that the town of Fort Mill works within. Of course, there's room for change, fluidity. As it relates to the UDO and the zoning, how much flexibility might there be once it's in place?
Yeah, well, I mean, your ordinances are never going to be set in stone, and I can say I hope and promise that it won't take us 50 years to update the one we're getting ready to adopt. We want to make sure, especially coming up in 2018, that'll be our 10-year anniversary for our most recent comprehensive plan. So we know over the next probably 12 to 14 months, we're going to be updating our comprehensive plan as we go forward. And so it'll be important that as we adopt those updates to that plan, that this ordinance isn't going to just sit on a shelf for the next 50 years and collect dust, but we'll be able to continue to update it. And as the vision changes and as what people desire and want to see in their community change, we'll be making sure and going back to revisit this document, every so often, just so we make sure it continues to be relevant for the type of development that we want to see in our community.
So really, from an overview, residents, it's to protect the integrity and the property of those living and calling Fort Mill home. And from a commercial standpoint, it takes out the gray area. It makes it more simplified, which again sets realistic expectations and fairness. So it really feels like a win-win. And you've done your part in being very transparent as it relates to public input and making everything available to share and review before any official vote takes place. So what is the next step?
Well, I'm going to respond to your first comment first. We know and we understand when somebody lives in Fort Mill or chooses to move to Fort Mill, their home is typically going to be their largest investment that they make in their lifetime. And whether it's a residential homeowner or somebody who's looking to open a business in our community, we value those people. We want to protect their investment, protect the quality of life that they've come here to enjoy. We want to make sure that our businesses are successful, and they can go anywhere in the country or anywhere in the region, and we hope that they will continue to choose Fort Mill. I think we've had a really good reputation as a community that invites new business and will work with new business because it's good for them to be successful, and of course it also adds to our tax base. But to get to your question going forward, we do have a couple meetings that are going to be scheduled over the next couple weeks. Our first one will be on December 6th from 5:30 to 7 p.m. here at the Spratt Building, and that'll be a public input meeting. So if anybody wants to come and just learn more about the draft Unified Development Ordinance, to see the new zoning map and to see if it would have any potential impact on their property, we would invite them to come to that meeting. It's just an informal type meeting. They can come and talk in small groups or one-on-one with planning staff. I'm sure we'll also have some members of council here at that meeting as well. So we would encourage them to come out on the 6th. And then also on December 12th, which will be our first council meeting in December, we have advertised and we'll be holding our first public hearing on the Unified Development Ordinance and the new zoning map. So it'll be two separate items on the agenda, and anybody who wants to come and provide their input and feedback to council. Again, this is just another step in the process. This ordinance isn't adopted until council approves the ordinance by two readings. So this will be an opportunity if somebody wants to come and speak directly to council. They'll have an opportunity to do so at the public hearing on December 12th at 6 p.m. Over at Town Hall. And we do have all the information posted on our website. We have the draft documents, the maps, the zoning transition summary. So all that can be found at our link, fortmillsc.gov/UDO. And we would encourage all residents and business owners to check out that information, to attend one of those two meetings. And of course, if they have a question, they can always reach us at 803-547-2034.
I think that's fantastic. And I heard you say earlier that you do welcome phone calls, because this is something that everybody needs to take ownership of in a way that impacts them, because the goal is to have the best UDO and zoning map that you possibly can, and the only way to do that is to get a lot of different perspectives and cross-check and balance and come up with the best overall for Fort Mill as we move forward in growth and we preserve our history and the rich heritage that makes Fort Mill so special.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Joe Cronin.
Thank you.
We appreciate all your work, and we encourage all of you to go to the website, learn more about the UDO. Joe Cronin has been working on this for a couple of years now. It's a lot of information, but we want everybody to have a chance to see what's going on in the town of Fort Mill as it relates to the UDO and the zoning map. Until next time, this is Patty Mercer on Fort Mill Business Today.